Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm very happy to be here, of course, as leader of the New Democratic Party, and very happy to see people in the audience from the Sandy Pond Alliance who are very interested in what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm very pleased, of course, to be joined by the federal NDP environment critic, Ms. Linda Duncan, who represents Edmonton Strathcona. Provincial New Democrats have been speaking out against changes to the metal mining effluent regulations, known as EMER, of the Fisheries Act since the changes first were proposed in 2006. The Williams government should have objected at that time, but instead they supported the change wholeheartedly. The government paved the way for 2 ponds in central Newfoundland, part of Duck Pond Mine, and now Sandy Pond in Long Harbour, to be turned into tailings dumps. The Williams government, by its silence, supported the federal government in setting a national precedent, which is a national embarrassment. Today, mining corporations across Canada are lining up to get permission to destroy natural water bodies. We have been and continue to be concerned about the use of freshwater bodies as tailings ponds. The New Democratic Party of Newfoundland and Labrador supports the Sandy Pond Alliance in their legal challenge against the federal government, which they brought forward on June 4th. The Alliance will argue in the Federal Court of Canada that the loophole in the metal mining effluent regulations that was created 4 years ago is illegal. This loophole allows mining companies to apply to dump toxic waste into 16 lakes. Before 2006, only lakes that had already been destroyed many years before were accepted and listed in Schedule 2 of the 2002 regulations as legal tailings dumps. The Alliance says that the changes to the regulations were not authorized by the Act and go against the meaning and intention of the Act. Thus, the Fisheries Act, not the regulations, would have required the amendment, and the issue would have been debated in the House of Commons instead of being dealt with in a secret cabinet meeting. It is shameful that the Williams government supported creating the precedent of turning over ponds to mining companies as cheap waste disposal systems. Mining companies lobby for these changes in order to save money. Destroying healthy water bodies is not environmentally sustainable mining. We're not opposed to mining, but mining companies should not be allowed to cause irreparable damage to the environment in order to save the expense of building artificial tailings ponds. Vale doesn't need to save the money. Its earnings in 2009 were $13.2 billion US. On top of that, it just got $1 billion from the Export Development Corporation of Canada, $250 million of which will be spent on Long Harbour. That is almost half the $489 million needed to build a tailings pond. And believe me, $489 million is a drop in the bucket for Vale. Vale can well afford to properly contain the waste from smelting Voisey's Bay ore in Long Harbour. It is simply more profitable for them to destroy Sandy Pond. Premier Williams' slogan has been, "No more resource giveaways." But letting Vale destroy a natural water body for a processing facility to save money is a clear example of a resource giveaway. His environment minister is responsible for not opposing this outrageous giveaway. The tailings will be there in perpetuity. The cost to the people of this province for the loss of Sandy Pond will be borne by generations of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians to come. The Williams government does not take into consideration the environmental costs. I would now like to invite Linda, the NDP MP from Edmonton Strathcona, to bring in the federal perspective to this discussion.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Michael, for including me in your press conference. And I'm absolutely delighted to be in Newfoundland, and every person I've met is wonderful. My grandfather's from Carbonaire, and I love this place. And because I love this place, I'm happy to speak out in defense of those who've stood up against all forces to try to protect Sandy Pond. Sandy Pond may sound like it's a tiny grain of sand, you know, in the ocean of land and water that we have in Canada, but it's a microcosm of what's happening in Canada with lack of action by the federal government in protection of the environment and public interests. I think if you stand back, the most important aspect here is the removal of any public consideration in decision making. And by the decision of the former federal government, Liberal government, to change the law to allow for the destruction of a fish-bearing lake, set the stage for what's happening now. It's absolutely reprehensible that that provision provides for no public consultation, no consultation with fishers who might be concerned about that fishery, no consultation with people who value that for recreational purposes, or people who simply respect a lake for its pristine ecological purposes. Today, as we speak, it's become revealed that the federal government have released their report on biodiversity. There is a major international meeting going on right now in Japan talking about what countries around the world have done to protect their biodiversity. And yes, the federal government has taken some measures to establish some new park reserves. But at the other end of the spectrum, we're going backwards in the protection of the environment and engagement of the public. It has been revealed in looking at the list of who the Prime Minister has been meeting with and who the Minister of Environment has been consulting with, is that about 90% is with industry, that they simply cut out the voice of the public. And environmental organizations are the voice of the public because our federal environment and fisheries agencies have not stood up to the plate and spoken on behalf of the protection of our fisheries and of our pristine environments. Sandy Pond is just one of more than a dozen lakes that are about to be sacrificed, and sacrificed they are. Companies such as this mining company can afford to develop its resources in a way that minimizes the impact. That's the obligation under federal environmental law. They're supposed to show alternatives, not simply find the most cost-effective, cheapest way to develop their ore and make a profit. It's the responsibility of the Department of Fisheries, of the Department of Natural Resources, of the Department of Environment to make sure that they proceed with their development in a way that minimizes impact on the environment. And it's also the obligation of the federal government as well as the Newfoundland government to ensure that people who are concerned or impacted have a voice in these decisions. These lands and waters are owned by the people of Canada. The lands and waters of Newfoundland are owned by the people of Newfoundland. And therefore, those people should have a voice in how development proceeds. So I'm simply a voice out here saying what's happening in Newfoundland is also happening across Canada. As we speak, the First Nation peoples of northern British Columbia are fighting to try to protect a pristine lake, Fish Lake. And in that case, at least the federal panel advised against approving the desecration of that lake. That decision sits before Cabinet. So we'll see if the federal government takes any kind of a different position when the federal panel actually recommends against, which frankly is the first time in history that they have actually recommended against a development. So I commend the Sandy Pond Group and the Sierra Club and the other organizations who've gone to court. It's reprehensible that Canadians are having to take their federal and provincial officials to court to simply assert the powers that they are given in law. Those officials are supposed to be there implementing their legislative mandate, and they're falling down on the job. So instead of this balance that Minister Prentice talks about all the time, and perhaps in Newfoundland, and certainly in the province I come from, they're always talking about balancing development and environmental protection. The scale is completely imbalanced when we look at the federal level. So I look forward to any questions. I'm delighted that my colleagues in Newfoundland are speaking out. They are a voice for the environment and a voice for the public, and a very important one, and I admire that.
Thank you, Linda, very much.